Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today for the August PowerAddicts Hangout, and thank you for bearing with us. Apparently, Google Hangouts Air has been discontinued, so we had a little bit of issues with live streaming, but we kind of reverted back to Teams, and thank you for joining us and uh, just making sure that we continue to have a good time today. And today we have two special guests, very amazing and brilliant guests. One is Alan Chai, who recently moved to Houston, Texas from the UK. He is a newly minted Power Apps champion. Congratulations, Alan.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today to showcase some of your amazing UI and UX tips for Power Apps. And amidst your recent move, I believe you're just getting your containers in and you're just settling in, and you still found the time to join us today, and that's amazing. Thank you. And the next guest we have is the Forms Pro Queen and Emoji Queen, Megan. And
Hi.
if you want to know the magic and art of possible with Forms Pro and Microsoft Flow, then today is your day. And Megan, it's all yours. Go ahead. We can't wait to see what you've got to show us.
Oh, we're jumping right in. Okay, hang on 1 second. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so we're going to do a very, very brief presentation first, just to go over a couple of things. So with regards to Forms Pro, we're going to be looking at doing an interactive demo. So hopefully you guys can all get an idea of how it actually works. So just a little bit about me. First of all, if you aren't already following me on Twitter, there's my information, and LinkedIn, YouTube, email, and website address. So I'll have that information later on as well.
Yeah, it's a video chat on Power.
Okay, so so what is Microsoft Forms Pro? So if you haven't used Forms already before, that was released in June 2006.
Sorry, Megan.
just-
I'm going to
yeah.
interrupt you. I'm going to
Yeah.
mute everyone, and then
Thank
you can
you.
unmute yourself.
Yes.
Not that I don't like.
So can you unmute yourself now? Megan?
Yep, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, let me get back to it. All right, so what is Microsoft Forms Pro? So Microsoft Forms was released in June of 2016. So that was just regular forms. And so that's really used to create surveys and quizzes. And it's relatively basic in terms of you can have responses filled out, and then you can access the information, download it, and review the data. But Forms Pro was released in March of 2019. So Forms Pro, the thing that is really, really exciting about Forms Pro for me is it's got a built-in integration with Office 365 and also Dynamics 365, which is exciting for me because I come from the old CRM world, and then also Power Platform because Forms Pro entities are all in CDS. So that to me is really, really exciting, what we're going to look at today. So general availability was July 1st of this year. And pricing is based on the number of responses that you receive per survey that are distributed by your users. So those are available on a license basis, kind of in blocks. If you've got a Forms Pro license, if you've got Dynamics 365 Enterprise, then you're going to have Forms Pro included, and that's going to be starting off with like the first block. I'm not going to go into pricing at all, but just keep that in mind in terms of how that is actually structured from a licensing perspective. So wanted to just go over quickly in terms of Forms Pro and the entities that exist. So like I said, this is stored in CDS. So you've got the actual survey itself. So when you create a survey, that's the first entity. Then you create all of your questions for your survey, and that's another entity. Then what happens is when someone fills that out, it creates a Forms Pro survey response entity or a record for that entity. And then from the survey questions and the survey responses, you get the survey question responses for each of those questions. Now, what happens is you can either have an anonymous survey, which we're going to look at in a moment, and then a non-anonymous survey, which we'll also look at. So what happens is when somebody fills out the survey, we get a Forms Pro survey invite if it's a non-anonymous survey, and that is actually an activity record, so therefore that's linked as an activity party record and also directly linked back to the contact. So those are all of the entities that exist. There's also an unsubscribe entity. It's not on this. We're not going to cover it today, but those are the ones that are important. All right, so a few things first. So I'm hoping that if everyone's sitting at their computer or they have their phone with them. So what I'd like you guys to be able to do is for the demo, obviously you always need the look of the demo guard. So saying a little sacrifice to the demo guards, hopefully everything goes well, timing to be on point, and then also I need a bit of audience participation. So if you guys can be prepared, then that would be awesome. All right, so what I'd like you to do is you can either scan the QR code with your phone or go to formspro.tips for me. And what I'm going to do is if you go to formspro.tips, I'm hoping that at least a couple of you will do this and play along so that it actually works and you can start to kind of see it. This to me is the best way of you being able to see how some of the really cool features of Forms Pro will actually come into play. Rather than me showing you how to create a form, it's about what happens when you actually fill out that form and how we can then create some personalization on forms, how we can capture that information in CDS. So if you're playing along at home, then you should have come to this form, so this survey. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill this out. So I'm going to put in my first and last name. I'm going to put in my email address. With me while I fill it out. Am I happy to provide my mobile or cell phone number? Yes. If you're doing this, go ahead and make sure that you put in your country code. Okay. And which continent? I'm in Europe. And what's my Power Platform of choice? I'm going to go with Flow. And then do I want to subscribe to the newsletter? For me, no, I don't need to. I write it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to submit this. All right, so if you've gone ahead and you've played along at home, what should be happening behind the scenes is we've got a Microsoft Flow, which we'll look at in just a moment, but that flow is basically being triggered based on this survey response being filled in. So what should, again, be happening if this is working behind the scenes is we should be getting the flow to look at that survey response and then check to see if this person already exists in CDS as a contact record. If they do, we're going to link this survey to that record. If not, we're going to create a new one. But either way, what we're going to end up doing, and let's just check my phone if you guys can see. I've got a text message. So the text message says, "Hi Jane, thanks for taking part in PowerAddicts Hangout and joining in during my Forms Pro demo. Please provide feedback on the next survey." So I should also have, yes, so this is my backup and just so I can show you from on my computer, but I've also sent an email as well. So hopefully some of you have actually gone through and done that as well and received the text message. So what we're going to do now is a couple of things we can see. I filled out my first name and last name, so that email that's come through to me is already been personalized. So we've got, "Hi Jane, thanks for spending time watching the Forms Pro demo. It's fun showing off some of the features, blah, blah, blah." Now what I want to do is I want to give some feedback. Now, as I filled out that survey, I put in some of the feedback and I gave my name, but then I also said that the most important thing to me, or the things that I like, is flow. And I also said that I'm in Europe. So what we've done is we've been able to customize this text here. So I can see it's great that people like you in Europe can join in online to learn and share experiences alongside others in the PowerAddicts community. Loving flow is awesome. So that's where I put in flow. I've been able to then customize this and bring through that parameter from that specific question. So then I've been able to do the same thing again, and I've been able to say, "You've said flow is your favorite Power Platform. What else are you interested in learning about?" So I want to learn about Forms Pro. What's the best thing about Europe? Pastries. And how likely are you to recommend Forms Pro to a colleague or friend? We'll go with 9. And what's the primary reason? It's awesome. So just a little example. Hopefully some of you did that and played along, and you can see there that we've been able to take that and customize everything. And then what I've done is at the end of that survey, we've forwarded on somebody and redirected them to a specific page on a website. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the flow that we had that triggered off initially. So we have a flow that triggers with a CDS new record is created, and we've got the entity name of survey response. So when a new record is created for the survey response, what we're going to do then is we're going to get the survey response details. So to do that, we're going to get the, there's a source response ID. We're basically going to turn that into an integer so that we can use that then to get all of the feedback from all of those specific questions that you filled out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to list contacts, and we're basically going to do a check to see if that email address that somebody filled out on the form already exists on the contact record somewhere, to see, does that contact already exist? Then what we're going to do is if that if that email address does already exist on a contact record, what we're going to do is if no, we're going to create a new contact record. So we're going to take the responses from the survey. So we had last name, we had email address, we had first name, we had phone number if somebody filled that out. We're basically populating that information from those different questions on the Forms Pro survey. Then what we're going to do is, remember where I showed you all of the different entities from Forms Pro, and one of the entities was that survey response entity, and it could either be anonymous or non-anonymous, which is hard to say. If we don't do anything with that survey response and we just left it, it's going to sit there as a non-anonymous survey. It's not linked to anything. So what we want to do is we want to update that survey response using the activity ID from the trigger, and then we're going to link it to that contact record that we just created. So it's a little bit different in terms of how we link it. We have a respondent field, which is actually just text, and that's the person's name. And then we have the respondent email address, which again is just text. I'm going to put in a subject so that I can see where this has come from. So the actual survey, what it is that happened. So I'm just going to put in PowerAddicts Hangout and then the person's name. And then we've got regarding, and we've got the contact entity. If the person already does exist, what we're going to do is we are going to, again, update the contact that already exists with those survey fields, and we're going to then also update that response with the existing contact. All right, so then what we're going to do is, because you then got a follow-up, you got an email, and you also potentially got a text message if you put your phone number in there, is we're going to then create what we call a survey invitation. So this is using the Forms Pro connector, and this is using the create an invitation action. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, which survey is it that we actually want to create the invitation for? And we're going to be able to pull in the fields from that first survey that were filled out. So we're going to pull in the email address, that we're going to pull in the first name, last name, and we're going to link that to the contact entity. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to pass through the continent and the Power Platform question that you filled out. What that does is when we fill out these and we tie them into an invitation, then we're able to put into the actual survey itself, we're able to pass those parameters back through. I'll show you that in just a moment. Then finally, what we're doing is we are setting up an email that we're going to send out, and we're going to include that invitation link. Then if you had filled out your phone number, we're basically checking to say, is there a mobile phone? Does that actually exist on the record? Or is it equal to nothing? So no, if it's got something in there. We're going to take that invitation link, we're going to use bit.ly, and we're going to shorten it. Now we need to shorten it because that link gets appended with all of the different parts of the parameters that we're passing back through. So if we just put the link directly in there, it's actually going to cut it off, and I'll still just see first name instead of Jane or whatever that might be. And then finally, I'm just using Twilio to go ahead and actually send out that text message to the contact. So if I just go ahead and look at the Forms Pro surveys themselves, so this one here where we've got give your feedback, this was the second one that was sent out. So that's the one where I knew who it was. So what we're able to do is we're able to add in parameters. So we can personalize different areas. We can personalize questions, or we can personalize text and descriptions. And I can put in first name, last name. Those are standard ones. But then I can also create additional personalization fields, so we can pipe in the variables and actually display them like you saw, where we saw the first name, we saw the Power Platform, we saw the continent that we'd passed through. So hopefully this gives you a very, very quick overview in terms of how you can use a bit of personalization. We can use Flow to send out the invitations to people. I've done all kinds of different flows that I'm putting blogs out, at least one every single week. So I've got one that's coming out that will check to see, let's say that you've got a case closure survey, but you only want it to be sent maybe once a week to somebody, because somebody might have 20 cases a week that you're trying to close for them. So I've got one that will check to see, well, how many surveys have they previously responded to? And then if they've already responded to X number, we won't send them any more. If somebody has been sent a survey invitation and it's been 2 or 3 days since they haven't filled it out yet, we can do a check and then we can send them a follow-up reminder. So there's a lot that we can do. The power to me with Forms Pro is that everything is stored in CDS, and the fact that we can tie everything in with Flow, and really it's Flow that's giving this the power, in my opinion. So I don't know if we've got any questions at all.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'm just wondering, do you think there is a possibility we could, like, I know a lot of companies do net promoter score surveys on an annual basis. Do you think Forms Pro is at that level where we could actually use that and actually make it much more meaningful by connecting it to Dynamics or something like that?
Yeah, so because it's in everything stored in CDS, so let me just go ahead and show you. So here's an app that I've got. So this will be telling whether anyone's filled it out. Okay, so we've got a few things that have been filled out. So we've got people, you can see here, we've got people who've put Power Apps, Power BI, Flow, and so on, and in the continent. So I've got my accounts, my contacts. I've also got cases in here, and here are all my Forms Pro survey entities and tied in with this. So you can also see here, and one of the questions that I put on that, the second survey that basically said, would you recommend Forms Pro to somebody? That is your net promoter score. So it's a standard net promoter score that you can put onto the survey. Now, the awesome thing is that it calculates then and does the percentage of detractors, percentage of promoters, and actually calculates your score. So whether it's 25, whether it's -30, whatever, that's great, but it only does it for the survey itself. So I've got a blog post that shows how you could do it for your entire organization, which is actually what is more important, not just a survey. It's valuable that, you know, a customer service manager would know what their net promoter score is for their area of the business, but as an organization, they need to know it as a whole. So absolutely, you can use this for that, just by adding a few extra fields on the contact record and the account record, and then having a flow that runs through and then actually updates that. So if I look at Jane Doe, for example, let's look at her. So one of the things that I've got is, let's see, of course, that's in my other environment. So hang on one second. But what I've got is the ability to be able to update that information using Flow, because everything's in CDS. So it's a pretty cool thing that we can do. So 100% you can use Net Promoter Score using this.
That's cool.
We have a few questions, Megan. I think the first one is, can I avoid CDS and Flow and still work with Flow and Forms Pro?
Can you avoid CDS? Was that question?
Yes. So the
Why would you
question
want
is,
to avoid CDS? That's my question back to that. No, you can't avoid CDS. So all of the so
I
let's
think it's
take
the licensing thing, because I think what people are thinking is like, if
yeah,
I'm going to go and use Forms Pro, the license that I buy for it, does
right.
that
Yeah.
cover me off using CDS? And I believe the answer to that is yes, isn't it?
So yeah, so stepping back, avoid CDS. You wouldn't use Forms Pro because Forms Pro, all of the records, all of the information is stored in CDS. Now, if it's just about licensing, then that's what's going to be covered. But yeah, I don't know if that's all it is, avoiding CDS, but you don't ever have to actually go and look at the information in CDS at all if you didn't want to, because the results are going to come back in to Forms Pro, so I can always go in and I can view my responses. But yeah, licensing, that's a slightly different thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one other question is, can we fill in an answer using the first name parameter?
No, so with parameters, the only thing that you can fill out is so if I go back here, so you can put stuff in the description for a question, or sorry, for description for the actual name of the survey. So we've got the title here, and then you've got the ability to have a description. You could put stuff in there and push those parameters through. You can also do it on a question. You cannot push parameters through as an answer, not yet. That's something that I have asked if that might be coming in the future, and it's something that's on the roadmap, but that could be any length of time really at the minute.
Okay, we have some great questions actually coming up. We probably have time for like 2 more before we move on to Alan's demo. But so one is, Brian says, I'd love to leverage Forms Pro and my head is now swimming with ideas, but I know nothing about CDS. Where should I go to learn more? And can you pre-fill fields in your form with parameters? It's pretty much
Yeah, so
what
that's
you
the one that I
talked
just
about.
answered.
Yeah.
Unfortunately not. But the fact that you don't necessarily have to have them as questions. So you could say, this is the information we have on you, first name, last name, email address, and push those through just in the description. So that's fine. You could still do that. In terms of learning, that's probably something that you guys could probably provide better suggestions than me in terms of more detailed stuff on CDS. I've written some information about it to try and explain, and then every blog that I do, I think the majority of them have had flow in there, and they're using the CDS connector, and it's explaining how it works. So I'm definitely doing that in all of my blogs, but I'm by far and no means anywhere near some of the other people that are on this call that are experts in CDS. So I don't know if
you got this with the pre-filled fields thing. Like, you do get, when you get the response back, there is relevance to that response through where you sent it from, though, haven't you? Because you know who you sent it to. So
Yep,
you kind of like
exactly.
some of that
So
stuff you're going to be able to link that back. So although
yeah,
you can't predefine it, like you can't predefine an answer, you could do something in flow with it where you append bits and pieces to it. So like the data's in there, it's just not necessarily in a response field, because why do you really need to put it in there if it's
well, exactly.
kind of,
If you've sent out the request for feedback and you've sent it because a case was closed, then you don't need to tell the person what their name is, right? So then don't put that on the form itself. So then we just closed case number 1234, and it was worked on by Keith Watling, the support rep. How did he do? That kind of thing. So you don't always need to pass all of the information back through if you're sending it out based on a trigger that's happened in CDS, whether it's Dynamics records, whether it's just regular CDS records, got nothing to do with Dynamics. It doesn't really matter. You've triggered it. You should know some of that information anyway.
Well, thank you, Megan. This was amazing. And it really did represent the art of possible with Microsoft Forms Pro and Microsoft Flow as well. I think it's just the tip of an iceberg, right? There's just so much more you can do with it. I can already
Absolutely.
think about the different things I can get started on. I haven't
Oh,
really
there's
tried.
loads.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's
And I've
just,
got like 10 more blog posts just sitting, waiting
wow.
to be written, and I'm still like, more people are asking questions. I'm like, oh, that would
Yeah.
be an awesome blog post idea. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, I think you shared where folks can follow you and where they can hit you up if they have any questions with your Twitter and your channel information in the very beginning. But thank you again. Thanks.
Welcome. No problem.
And Megan is still going to be hanging around, and she will be more than happy to answer your questions. So keep those questions flowing in the channel, and
For sure.
yeah, and we will move on to Alan. Alan, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. So
Okay. All right. And Alan
I'm
is
going.
one of, yeah, early adopter of the Power Platform, and he has a flair for creating Power Apps that look no different than native apps. And he's going to share some of his top tips and tricks that any app maker can use to build professional looking apps. Alan, it's all yours right now.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So my session will be slightly different compared to Megan. It's more on sharing the design tips, yeah, on how we can make our apps look more professional looking, more like a functioning like a native apps. So these are just some example that I have in production over the last 12 months. And I'll be going through these quick few slides to give everybody a bit of tips on how to achieve some of this look and feel. Yeah. So a bit of myself. My name is Alan. I've been around for about 21 years in the energy services industry. I am actually an electrical engineer. Yeah. So and I have lived and worked in 4 continents across multiple countries. And only 2 weeks ago, I came back again to Houston for the second time. Over the last 12 to 12 to 18 months, I jumped on Power Apps pretty late compared to most of you guys. I came in about April last year. That's when we only on trial license, and then we only become fully licensed in July, and that's when we started to ramp out the production. So I myself have produced more than 80 plus business apps across the Europe continents in my previous role, and also I have managed to you know encourage and build out a community of citizens developers between the company, 120 plus people across 32 countries. And one of the success story that I share with some of the Microsoft guys was that today, because the platform is so easy to be trained, I can take fresh students from fresh out from the school and train them up to become advanced Power Apps user between 1 to 2 weeks. Yeah. So that's just myself, and just last back in June, I got this recognized as one of the Power Apps champs. So some of the business production app that we have across the company right now, these are just some sample that I want to show everybody. This was shown in Ambas in June. We have a various type of production app that is, like as you see from the screen, is not much different from native apps. And question is, most people ask me, how do you do that, right? So I have this very simple guiding principle. Yeah. So when you do UX, you must remember that UX, making the experience of the app memorable, is more important than what the app does. Yeah. So users often forget about the data and the content, but they remember how it make them feel. Yeah. So it works in advertisement and it works in web content. So I asked myself, why not use it in your app, right? So use graphics, layout, text, interactive elements to work in synergy to present to the user that kind of experience that they want to come back to use it. Yeah. And believe it or not, most of the user, they don't read, they scan. Yeah. So you must make your app in such a way that it's scannable and people do not have to read them in details. So I use large buttons, I use color variation and visuals to convey the instruction to the data. Yeah. And making your app scannable will appeal to your audience. most people will scan the content that strikes them, and then they will switch to reading more when they find out when they want to find out more, right? So that's important. And then the third guiding principle that I use is always keep your app clear and simple. Yeah. Believe it or not, you only have half a second. Yeah, half a second to impress your user. They evaluate your design, and they will decide. You need to decide what you want your user to do and make it very apparent. Yeah, don't make it too difficult to find action buttons, and also visually focus attention on the main button versus a bunch of buttons. Yeah, on your main page, main screen. Yeah, constantly reconsider what your app is meant to do, right? And make it easier to use. Yeah. So one of your design thinking is that make sure that your app is meeting the majority of your users' needs and allowing for extra functionality to be hidden. They don't have to be on the main screen. Make them hidden, but make the majority of the user able to do and achieve what they want. Yeah. So clear and simple, keep it that way. Then the fourth guiding principle that I use is try to reuse all the common design element. Yeah. So try not to reinvent them by becoming too creative with new UI patterns. UI is a skill. Yeah. It's not something that normal people can build it and prove that it works. Yeah. So there's a huge amount of research go into UI and UX. So if there's something out there that's working already, don't try to reinvent it. And you want to have something familiar looking interface where user automatically know what to do, right? For example, an action button that stand out as an actionable item, a sub-menu access that is located in the top corner, hidden as under a hamburger icon. So those kind of standard components, there is no need to redesign. Yeah. Number five, you must know your audience. Yeah. So you must have a good idea of who the audience is for your app before you create it. How to best design the interface will actually come from them. Yeah. Once you have a clear idea of your audience for your app, you can then find their needs and wants and design the perfect design that meet their desires. Yeah. And also visual hierarchy. Yeah. So when putting the most important elements on the interface, highlight them so the user can focus on them. And then in the design, there are a lot of ways to highlight them, but the most effective one is to make it larger than anything else on the screen so that the user is drawn to it, or use dominant colors. Yeah. So I use this Peter Morville's user experience honeycomb, and you can find more about it from usability.gov site. And inside that honeycomb, you will find these 7 components, which or 6 components that I actually try to stick to. Whenever you build a UX, make sure it's useful, usable, desirable, findable, accessible, and credible. Yeah. These are 6 components that will make your app a success. Yeah. All these are very philosophy. A lot of people say I'm talking a lot of theory stuff. But what is practical? So I put together something that is really practical design tips for Power Apps, the top 10 tips. So if you work for a company, I'm sure you have some sort of a corporate colors. Stick with it. Yeah. Don't try to create your own color and it's not going to work. Stick to your corporate colors or stick to something that you know it works in your environment. Yeah. Font selection, stick with 1 or 2 maximum per app. Try not to introduce too many fonts in a single app. It's going to create busyness and it's going to distract away your user. And keep your branding configurable. Why I say that is because many of my apps are reused multiple times. So in order to make it more effective and productive for the company, I always make them configurable so that it can be rebranded for other usage. Have your standard menu ready. So that is what I meant by if you have a standard design for a set of icons that you want to have it across all apps that you decide you put on out there, stick to that, and it create that branding for you. Be pixel sensitive. The X and Y. Yeah. Today, as our devices, mobile devices, getting bigger and bigger, the screens, even a deviation of 1 pixel is very distinct, very easy to spot by your user. So that's what I mean by be pixel sensitive. If your X and Y is defined as a certain coordinates, make sure it's always the same in all the screens that you design. Yeah. Utilize the geometry shapes or icon to guide actions. Yeah. So rather than putting text as buttons, normally I like to use icon that makes sense. Yeah. To bring user to the actions, and also make use of infographic to do the talkings. Right. So if you have big numbers, you have some stats that you want to show, display those big on your app on the screen. So visually, again, it convey the message without you telling much. Yeah. And one other trick that I use a lot is this gray box. You will notice that a lot of my apps later, when I show a demo, I seldom or never use line borders. Yeah, because I find the line borders give you it creates busyness in the screen. If you remove those lines and just create a light gray zone behind, it actually replaces tables quite effectively, and it is smoothing out the whole look and feel. And avoid round the corners. Again, is another simple tricks to clean up your screen. Yeah, and watch the paddings. That's my last tips. Paddings, what I mean is that when you have text, make sure you don't put them too close to the edges, too close to an image. Make sure you have enough sufficient paddings to give some space. Yeah, I call it space for the text to breathe. Yeah. So this is the top 10 tips. So now let's go on to the demo. So I'm going to run a few demos that I prepare and sanitize for this session. So first of all, I'm going to show everybody a quick one. This is an app that I built in PowerAddicts, and I'm going to show you a live one through my iPad here. So I have an app here that was built to run a workshop. Yeah. So again, if you look at, I'm not going to talk about the functionality, but I'm going to talk more about the design. Yeah. So as you can see here, I stick to a certain set of colors that work for my company, right? And I use edge to edge design. I don't keep white spaces on the borders. Yeah. And I don't have a single lines to draw boxes. Yeah. And then if I go to the agenda, as you can see again, I use gray boxes, right, instead of lines. So that will remove the busyness on the screen, and also it creates zones to visually separate your data. Yeah. So sure. So more example in here. You can see more example on how things are being designed in a very clean way. Yeah. So this is one example. And then I want to show you another one, which is this. I created this for Power. So this is a slightly different design, and this is for Media Portal. Yeah, so this is where I load up all the Mbus videos just to create a video on demand app where I can pick and choose the topic I want, and I can view them. Yeah. And if I choose one of them, I can play with them. Right? So again, you can see in the design, I also play with the color tone in this particular one by having the image gray out in the background, just to create the depth, right? The depth to let your center attention, which is the middle one, to pop up on the screen. Utilizing rectangular shapes to highlight your title when you have a situation like this where you have lots of graphics, lots very busy backgrounds. But how do you bring a title out? Is by having consistent bar right down there that show you 2018 April Hangout and 2019 May Hangout. So those bars, just by using a little trick like this, it creates some sort of consistency to your app. Yeah. And one final one is this. This is another design where I again try not to reinvent my own components. I use what's best in industry. So this is a almost like a mashup of all the major social media platform in one place, where I can put together a quick app for announcement or for some gallery viewing. Yeah, and they are all driven from PowerAddicts, right? So they look and feel not much different from real apps. So let me show you one. Okay, here. So from here, I can load it and write my comments, right? So these are the few demo that I have in my screen. I hope it gives you a bit of insight into how to achieve some of these tricks. Yeah, if you follow this guideline, most of your app will be cleaned up actually. Yeah.
Just to let you know, like people's like minds are blown right now by seeing
Yeah.
all your apps. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
silence is just like not because people not seeing it, people are just going crazy seeing your UI and UX. So
It's just impressive. It's just another level of UI UX that we've all seen from before. It's just amazing how. So do you, Ellen, do you take inspiration from any online resources, or is this more of your creativity? You kind of mix it up with online resources that you look at for design inspirations?
I think for design inspiration, I look at what is successful out there, right? So I look at Amazon website, I look at eBay website, I look at Facebook website, Twitter website, and pick what strikes me. Why do I go back there so often? It's because it works, right? So they have invested a lot on UX down there. Pick pick their UI design components that you feel that it works for their user. Why not use that for yourself, right? So, for
Right.
example, let's look at Twitter. You have the like retweet and stuff like this. It's a very subtle gray text on the bottom. So look beyond just the button. Look through the color, right? Like the guides I gave you, the colors, the fonts. It stick to a certain font, stick to a certain color, gray. So reuse the same method in your app. It will help. It will help, right? So gray is my best friend because in this case, gray actually provide the data on the screen and yet not screaming on your screen. Yeah. So it stays subtle.
Well, that's awesome. And
Yeah.
have you had to build apps that are that cover accessibility, like people who are colorblind, or have you ever had
Ah,
to come up with designs for that?
so for that, actually, I haven't got into that yet. But in reality, today those accessibility features are built in on most mobile OS, right? So like
Right. Yeah.
in iOS, you can just triple click and to activate the guided access, which is kind of nice. That helps us in terms of developers saving the effort of building another set of screens.
Yeah. I think one of the tips that really hit me was that you had on your slide was um, people usually scan and don't read, because even though that's what I do, I never really thought about it that way, like while designing the app. So I never really. That's a really good tip to remember.
Yeah.
and one question that I have is, so I saw your tip on using the brand kind of the corporate colors and stuff. Uh, how about the other colors that you choose, like that, like some? Do you have like a color for doing some action and like other different types of colors that you should be choosing for different types of buttons or elements in your app, and where do you pick these colors from, like the exact color? Because that's also something to, I mean, gray has like multiple types of gray.
Mhm.
Which one do
Yeah.
you pick?
So that's a very good question. Actually, I do have something like this. Let me show you. It's actually something that I teach about PowerPoint. I can actually bring this in. Uh, when I choose color, there are certain types of color that I recommend. Uh, actually these are the six the few color combination that works for me. I try to tie that back to the Power Platform as well. Yeah. And the gray actually is not in this slide there. Actually, I do have a set of grays that actually complement the rest of the color combination, which I can share in the follow-up notes, I guess.
Sure.
Mm.
Okay. Thanks.
But also, Vivek, you did mention a good point there. Some colors do have some meaning. So especially the traffic light colors, yeah. So you have the red, amber, and green. They carry some specific meaning. When green means good, amber means warning, right? Red means something bad happened, right? So you want to make use of that natural language between the color to convey the message as well in your app. Yeah.
I feel like I need to go and rebuild all my apps now. After seeing this, I mean, I've tried the tricolors to like the things that kind of are complementary for each other. But I think though that the way you put it together, is completely is night and day. Like these look like professional apps that you will find um, on some other popular websites. So kudos to you for this. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. So to be honest, when I build an app, I spend, I would say, more than half my time trying to decide the colors, yeah, rather than building the apps.
I think it's worth the time.
Yeah.
It shows on the app, so it's
Yeah.
definitely worth the time. And that's quite a lot of number of apps that right there that you've got. How many apps have you built? Just sort of curiosity.
By now, it's 80 plus, yeah.
Wow,
Production apps, yeah. I'm talking about.
that's awesome.
Apps
Yeah.
that
You see, like for me, what you can see there is the consistency of following the brand guidelines. Like, and you can't stress that enough. Like, so when you go out and you start your Power Platform journey, talk to your marketing department if you're in an enterprise, or just have a chat with a customer. 9 times out of 10, they've got something. Like if it's a big firm, they're going to have a proper brand guidelines, and in there they'll even give you suggested color pairings. So pick one that works for you and stick to it. And you can also sort of like, so you know, I kind of like try and segment them. So I'll have a like one of the color pairings might be for one function in the business, and then another set of pairings is for another function in the business. So you know where that kind of like thing lives. So they've got an identity and a brand internally. And if you don't get given a brand guideline, then you need to look at their marketing materials or whatever they have and all that kind of thing, like rip their website off, like that whole 9 yards thing. But it's really tough if they've not got like a consistent brand guideline. There's some very famous companies that use the color red, and they don't actually have a written down. Up until when I was working in design in the 90s, they didn't have a firm color for what that red was. And we won't mention what that big company was, but red is synonymous with them. They might come from Atlanta, but yeah, they didn't have a red. Like it was just whatever they had. So
Yeah.
have that conversation for sure.
Could I
Yeah,
ask? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna add a comment. Like if you look at Facebook, it's just a combination of blues and grays, but the app still looks good. It's just probably just a few primary colors, but then it's just the tips that actually make a big difference on how
What
you
would be
place
your
those
tip,
colors.
Alan?
Yeah.
Sorry, Keith, talking over.
No,
What would be
go ahead.
what would be your tip, right? So one of the things I find really difficult is working in the Power Apps window. The window's quite small, and then having to constantly kind of do a design, nudge it over a bit, like blow it up to see what it looks like again, like getting that sizing right, the text and everything. I find that's a real challenge for me.
Which is why the UX design tools is going to be very, very extremely important when you're working in a small space, very small screen real estate. That's when you play along with all these tricks, color accents, like in this case, Vivek, I found on my slides. So these are the gray codes that I use, combination. Playing with all these tricks that I mentioned earlier, you will then start to realize that that phone tablet phone space is actually more than sufficient. Yeah. once you master the tricks, you realize you can do a lot more. Yeah.
No, I mean specifically like that PowerApps has this propensity to put stuff on the screen that's big. Do you know what I mean? Like when you actually insert something into PowerApps, like it's instantly big because they want to make it accessible and all that kind of stuff. So how do you kind of like judge the size when you're designing those apps? Do you spend a lot of time kind of like in preview mode, or do you just kind of scale it up in the screen? Do you hide stuff like when you're working and building the app?
Okay, so when I build the app, normally I zone the screen first, right? You zone it out and say I have a header, so I make sure that nothing goes into a header, and that's going to be the defining moment. Like for example, in here, if you look at my screen, most of them has a header on the top, right? So that header zone means that it's untouchable, and then my buttons will then resize to a scale that is reference to that. Yeah.
Nice. Like that. So that gives you a really interesting perspective, and you can
Perspective.
that's clever. That's really clever.
Yeah. And like to answer to Vivek's question, this is the great. Yeah.
Now, one thing I say, I find that like if you start, so I regularly steal the grays off of Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of thing, and you find that their grays always tend to lean slightly towards the blue, and I wonder whether that's because their brand is blue, so they tint the grey ever so slightly over to that kind of thing. And I wonder whether I'd kind of maybe just nudge the red down a bit, nudge the blue up a bit, like kind of if I've got a blue design, or then like tint it towards the green ever so slightly if I'm doing, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, interesting, man.
So for me, gray is not your primary color. Yeah. So your corporate color is probably going to be any other colors. Gray plays as a supplement, complement to it, and play as when you have secondary text, secondary buttons that you do not want them to scream, you put them as gray. Yeah. So it works with most of the colors.
I think I've used Google Material Design because that gives you like a palette to pick from, where you can pick like the primary, secondary, and then it'll give you suggestions on what your button colors and labels and header text should be, which I found to be very useful because it kind of does most of the job for you. It just builds that whole color palette for you, and then you can play around by changing it based off of your corporate branding for your apps. So I think that's one resource that I've used lately, and it's been very helpful.
Is there, I guess, how do you make sure the 120 plus people in the company follows something what you have kind of come up with, right? I mean, I know you are the kind of the UX expert, you have the background in it, but then like how do you make sure that everybody is following that kind of a guideline?
So it's important that especially when you're working in an enterprise, because in the past there wasn't any structure. So right now in my new role, I'm actually providing this kind of structure to the rest of the organization by redeploying the design principle that I have deployed to the rest of the organization. So everybody follow the same kind of a design guidebook, right? And when I say a design guidebook means that if I say I need to have the menu available in all apps, the menu should show up in everywhere. Yeah.
We have a couple of really good questions on the chat window. We have one that talks about I build the functionality first, then pretty it up after it works. So do you do both at the same time?
I actually do the other way around. I do the design first, then I figure out the functionality, how to incorporate the functionality in my design. Yeah. So to me,
awesome.
UX first. Yeah.
Samir has a question for you. He says, since design is such a subjective topic, when a user of your app or a stakeholder executive has different views on design, how do you navigate that conversation?
Good question.
Yeah. All been there. Yes. Be good to know how.
For that kind of question, I like to echo what Keith mentioned, right? So it's very important that you work closely with your internal communication or branding, right? Corporate marketing group. you want to be friend with them. Make sure that you follow their design guidebook. If not, whatever you do is going to be thrown out the window, right? You have to redo. So making sure that you are aligned with the that's also the tips that I mentioned. The align with your corporate color, corporate fonts. Then you are not deviating, and by the time you push out your app, it's not going to be too late. It's for sure going to be okay. Yeah. It's only when you do not follow, then you're going to have issue trying to get people on board. Yeah.
I think Mehdi has a comment that he uses Behance.net for design inspiration. I've never used that. I think that's a
Never
good
heard before.
tip.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
good.
it's good to note. Yeah. There's another question from Samir. He says, do you put formal gates so an app maker has to pass the design review before the app can be published?
Mhm. That is a very good question, but we haven't reached the maturity yet. We're working on that. Yeah.
Cool. Don't see any more questions yet, but we have like about 3 more minutes. If anybody has any questions for Megan or Alan, feel free to put them out there.
Or any other questions around Power Apps or Flow?
Yeah, it can be
Or
any
Power
question.
BI.
Mhm. So I'm pretty excited about the delegable functions that were recently hasn't been announced, but I think it was Christopher Webb and Reza Durrani who found that that the choice columns and person type fields are now delegable.
Yep, in for SharePoint, right?
Yeah, for SharePoint, I think it does make it a lot more easier now.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty awesome, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So Brian has a question. We have 2 minutes. We probably have time for like 1 or more questions. He says, I'm struggling to be granted permissions to CDS from my IT. Any suggested arguments?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. Right, show them how much full package Dynamics FinOps costs. Right, show them how much the full packet of Salesforce costs. Right, so like show them that like FinOps is like $150 or whatever it is, and then show them that they're getting it for this new kind of like Power Platform price of 10 bucks, right? And that they're getting model driven, which used to be 40. And I think model driven, like when you get into it, you'll see that there's this speed with which you can change your business processes, and that's fundamentally like game changing. Like Power Apps, Canvas apps, like that's enough. Like that would be 10 quid out of the box straight away. But the new licensing model, having the model driven in there and the portals is just absolutely like mind blowing. So definitely have that conversation and say, look, okay, looks expensive, like maybe it is. There are economies of scale, I think, to be had as well. But certainly, like when you look at your EA, but certainly, like if you compare it to what you're getting, if you're going to buy Dynamics off the shelf, that's kind of $60, or if you're going to buy FinOps, that's like hundreds. So yeah, just blind them with numbers and say you're actually getting this for nothing. So off you go and buy it. That's what I did anyway.
Yep. There's a question for Megan on Forms Pro and environments. Any tips when needing to upgrade CDS on your environment?
Nope, because I'm not really sure how I would upgrade CDS because my world is CRM, so I don't know the answer to that. Sorry. Anyone else?
I think the whole point of CDS is it kind of upgrades itself.
Yeah, I don't know the answer on that one specifically for CDS.
But there was a big upgrade for CDS earlier in the year, and there hasn't been any other talk of upgraded CDS as of yet. Since this, I think it was everyone had a big upgrade CDS, even if you're just using Flow. And I forgot when it was, but there hasn't been any talk of upgrading CDS since then that I know of.
And any changes to Forms Pro specifically, they're rolling them out directly to to Forms Pro, like you're just going to see that there's new stuff there all the time. So yeah, CDS specifically, no. Forms Pro, you wouldn't need to do anything in terms of upgrades either at the moment. Whether they would change that in the future, I don't know, but at the moment you wouldn't need to do anything.
Yeah, I've been using CDS since version 1, and the only time I had to do anything was moving from version 1 to version 2.
Yeah.
So that was the only time. After that, it's been just, green light, no issues. They take care of everything.
Yep. I think we have time for probably one last question from Chris. It's what data source do you make most of your apps with?
Is that for Alan?
For me, I can tell you it's 100% SharePoint because I don't have CDS yet. Yeah. So most of my apps are quick deploy and citizen developers level. So the easiest way for them to put them together and still maintain a pretty intact permission control, access control, SharePoint would be my recommended option.
Oh. Well, thank you, Megan and Alan, for joining us today. And Megan, I know it's a pretty weird time zone for you, but you still came out and joined us and helped share all your knowledge about Forms Pro and Flow with us. Thanks once again.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And Alan, I hope you settle in quickly with your move and everything, and we can wait to see more of your apps as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining. The YouTube link for this Hangout, I think Vivek just shared it. Did you share it? Yeah.
That's just a channel link,
Channel,
but I mean,
okay.
allowed to download it and then put it. But I'll put it by tonight. And we'll have a next Hangout on September 10th. That's so second Tuesday of every month.
Yeah.
So watch out for an invite for that as well.
Yes.
All right.
Yep. All right. Have a good night, good evening,
you
good
all.
morning, wherever you are. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
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 So but you can stop the check. Let's stop there. You go. Stop recording.
Oh wait, I need to stop. Okay.